Hello, everyone. Today we will be discussing project-based learning and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are designed to address global challenges, including those related to poverty, inequality, climate, environmental degradation, prosperity, and peace and justice. The goals interconnect and leave no one behind. Looking at these sustainability goals through the lens of problem and project-based learning, the possible authentic learning experiences aligned with standards are enormous. The world in which students live is ever more globally connected. These goals can help students relate to their world thinking locally, nationally, and globally. For our students, it is important for them to understand what is happening around them before they can think in bigger terms of national and global connections. I would like to take a moment to introduce myself. I'm Heather Wertman from Northeastern Pennsylvania, and I'm an educator of elementary classrooms for over 20 years and central administration office for a few years, and now full-time with Define Learning. I'm the Director of Educational Collaboration and Learning. And here with me today is my colleague, Meghan Raftery.
Hi, my name is Meghan Raftery, and in addition to developing content and professional learning for Define Learning, I also serve as an innovation coordinator in Virginia Beach, Virginia, where I live. I started using Define Learning when I was the elementary science and social studies coordinator for my district, and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals were a really important part of a 2016 initiative that we had to start some global schools in our elementary schools in Virginia Beach. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm excited to talk to you about it today.
Thank you so much, Meghan. So Meghan, can you briefly describe what the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are and how they might be used in schools?
Yeah, so the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are part of a strategic plan for the United Nations that is released about every 40 years. And they address the big issues that are important to the world right now. This current plan has a really good, very succinct messaging that goes with it that includes these graphics and then these pockets of different types of things that are going on around the world, everything from poverty to how our buildings are built, to animals and water cleanliness and gender equality. So the goals are important for many organizations who are working towards tackling global problems. They also are really well done in this particular plan to help students be part of the conversation in terms of what impact they might have on the world moving forward, who is also working on these same problems, and how can they solve a problem locally that may have an impact globally.
Meghan, so what is the connection between the UN Sustainable Development Goals and PBL, or project-based learning?
So really good project-based learning centers on a big idea. It's something that's transferable outside of the project that the student is likely to encounter in their real world. So the Sustainable Development Goals are a natural fit for big ideas that might align to things that teachers have in their curriculum, but also things that students may be interested in or local problems that they might be facing. So for example, students have a natural curiosity about animals. But when you take their interest in animals and you link it to a global problem, such as the black market or illegal trading or environmental degradation, all kinds of things, it helps the students to see how their interests can be also useful in the real world and how they might be part of changing something. So providing those authentic learning experiences through the lens of the UN sustainability goals helps the students to see how what they're studying in school is part of this bigger picture. What are other people thinking about and knowing about when it comes to this particular thing I'm learning about in my curriculum? So the UN sustainability goals are organized in those 17 kind of buckets. At the same time, project-based learning is organized into essential project design elements that kind of teach us how to use project-based learning effectively. And they're really well aligned to the big ideas in the Sustainable Development Goals. So what I'm going to do is just go through each of those design elements with an example of a sustainable development goal that's related to that particular key element so we can understand them side by side, the element in PBL alongside the sustainable development goal, and how it can help support students transferring their knowledge, their application of content and skills across learning experiences in school. So the first one we'll talk about is the idea of a challenging problem. So excellent PBL starts with a challenging problem or question. So the UN goals cut across a whole bunch of different academic disciplines. So everything from earth systems to economics to culture to literacy. There's many, many opportunities to connect what the students are learning in school and what's in the standards to a challenging problem or question through the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So one example is the task on defined learning called urban heat islands, where students learn that different types of pavement and rooftops can actually change the temperature of different parts of a city. And that has implications that cross subject areas. So for example, kids might learn geographically, where are those areas located? What's happening climate-wise in those places? What are the economic effects of higher temperature in a particular area? What does that mean for food security and clean water and all those other things? So as students are working on that urban heat island task, they're examining their local environment, and then they're also connecting to this larger goal of sustainable cities and communities. So no matter where they live, anywhere in the world, this idea of urban heat island will be important, but they're also seeing it from a local lens. So that challenging problem or question tells the students, this is a problem that's big in the world, and you're going to be part of solving it. Nobody knows the answer yet, and you can be kind of tackling that problem alongside us. The next design element is sustained inquiry. It's tightly connected to that challenging problem. Sustained inquiry just means the students are going to keep persevering through this problem, and finding an answer might lead them to more questions and more questions and more questions that might not just last through that project. It probably is going to last throughout that school year, and then maybe even across the school year into other things the student might do, like taking electives or joining a club or volunteering because they're so interested in that problem. A good example of that is the defined learning task energy management consultant. And in this task, what students do is they go around the school building and they look for ways that the building can be more energy efficient. And that might be really open-ended, just let's go find some ways. And the students might come up with things like lighting and heat sources and materials that are used in the building or cleaning supplies. The teacher can also kind of narrow it down to a specific topic in their content, such as maybe sound could be something that they're addressing through that energy management consultant task. But ultimately, kids are learning a bigger lesson about affordable and clean energy and just the built environment in general. They start looking at their school building in different ways. They start looking at any building in different ways. And they start to think more about this idea of energy efficiency. So that gateway to sustained inquiry is a really important design element, and the United Nations goals are a really good way to do that. The third element, also very linked to the first two, is authenticity. So really what authentic learning experiences do, it tells the students that the thing you're learning now is important in the world, it matters, and you're doing something that has an impact. So the student is actually taking what they're learning in school and they're applying it to something that matters. The product they're creating isn't for an assignment, it's for somebody who needs it. So an example of this one is a task in defined learning called the virologist. And this one is specifically about the Zika virus from a couple years ago, was passed by mosquitoes, where the students are actually talking about vaccines and vaccine dosing. So of course, this is not about our current virus or current vaccine, but it does have immediate authenticity for the students to understand this really does matter in the world. And the knowledge that I'm gaining could be helpful to the good health and well-being of the global community now and in the future. So that authenticity is evident in some of the selection of the tasks that you pick alongside the goal that you're connecting it to. The next element is student voice and choice. So in really good PBL, students are able to make some choices along the way that show them that where they're being successful as a learner. So they're able to actually share their knowledge and information in ways that give the teacher a little bit of a window into what the student knows and understands and is able to do. And what's great about student voice and choice is that it doesn't matter what the entry point is for the student. Wherever they come into the classroom, in a project-based learning scenario, they can grow from where they are. And oftentimes they don't even realize that they're starting from a different baseline. So a great example of this one is the classroom architect task, which is really popular at the beginning of the school year or any time of transition, where students are actually getting a say in designing the learning environment in their classroom, which links to this United Nations goal of quality education. So asking the students, what does a quality education look like for you personally, is a really powerful question where the student can start to say, I need quiet, or I need collaboration, or I need my teacher to be nearby, I need clear expectations, I like to be comfortable. All of these different things are helping them to understand, what does a quality education mean for me personally? And it's also a good opportunity to talk about how the different unique needs of all the students in that classroom together create the needs of the class. Now imagine the student taking it from the needs of the class to the needs of the school, which then talks a little bit more about architecture and design. Needs of the school leads to school system, leads to district, leads to the country. But now maybe we're going to look at what quality education looks like in other countries and understand a little bit more about what are the challenges in other places, what are the privileges where we are, what are some of the things we could learn from other places. So voice and choice is a really good element to focus on when students are new to us, when we're trying to learn about them, but also when we need them to grow at different rates. So when we're talking about that kind of asset-based thinking, that idea of acceleration instead of remediation, voice and choice is a really good element to help the kids kind of own their learning and to manage the classroom in that way. One of the elements that sort of couples with that idea is reflection. Really important element of project-based learning is the ability for the students throughout the project to talk about what they're learning, what's working for them, what's not, what might be something they need support in, or what's something they're discovering about themselves. So that reflection is an assessment in and of itself. The teacher can learn quite a bit about the students in the classroom, what they need, what they're interested in. And as they learn those things, they can design an instruction around those interests and those successes and those really good kind of the best things that students can do, those strengths that they have. So an example of this one is the local development planner task, which has the students actually designing a parking lot for a local shopping center. And it links to this global goal of industry, innovation, and infrastructure. It teaches the kids that again, that built environment at a big level has implications. So the students are actually designing, where will this parking lot go? How many spaces? What size do they need to be? And through that, there are many, many, many math concepts embedded. And what the teacher can do with that is they can find out through reflection, where are the students struggling? Where are they having some difficulties? How can we maybe pull a small group and shore that up? And where are students actually showing us some potential that we didn't realize that they have? Wow, they actually know more about that than I thought if we put it in this real world context. So that starting line can be kind of fluid in the classroom as the students are reflecting. The teacher can pick up that information and use it immediately in how they're designing their instruction. Another example that links to assessment is the element of critique and revision. So this is where students are responding to feedback. And that feedback may come from their peers or the members of their group, their teacher, maybe even somebody in the community who's giving them feedback to say, here's how you can improve what you're doing. So instead of the teacher saying, you're behind, or this is your grade, the student is getting real feedback from somebody to say, your product would be better if, which changes the dynamic of how that assessment feedback is received and the quality the student's producing, and probably the speed with which they're getting better. So instead of just practicing their math facts, they now understand accuracy is really important, or this agricultural lobbyist task, the people we're presenting to won't take us seriously if we have errors in our math or spelling errors. And so now the student might be more receptive to some practice because it's in service of this goal of theirs. So this task, agricultural lobbyist, has the students examining GMOs in food. And one of the things that they can get out of this task is that it's not as simple as health or environment or economics or hunger. It's all of those things. So the United Nations goal of zero hunger could possibly be in conflict with environmental goals or economic goals that are not met. So a GMO is going to mean that foods are going to grow easier and they're going to be abundant, but that doesn't necessarily mean they are good for the health and well-being of the community. So that rigor, the complexity that comes with a task like this allows the student to explore multiple subject areas at the same time and get critique and revision and grow in different ways because the task is rich and rigorous enough to support that kind of learning and to motivate them to persevere when things are difficult. The final design element is my personal favorite. It's the public product. And this is where the students are actually producing something real. They're making it for an audience that's not just their teacher. It's not just, I'm giving this and then I'm getting a grade. Instead, they're doing something that matters. And they're probably talking about it with somebody other than somebody in the school. So public products can mean connecting with the local community. And one of the things that's great about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals is it's likely that people in the local community organizations are familiar with these goals. So one of the goals of the United Nations is partnership for the goals. So when you think about where does water come from, as students do in the civil engineer water treatment task, they need to know who actually is in charge of this in my local community. Where is our water source from? How are we make sure that it's clean? What are some unique problems in our local area, maybe due to our geology or some factors that have to do with the built environment? They're exploring something about their local area. But with the United Nations goals as a starting point, it might be more likely that the students are going to start to see who's working on this in my community and how can I maybe talk to them and get feedback from them and share with them. And it opens the door for them to see that the community is connected in ways that may not seem evident until they start exploring those goals and that task. So that complement of PBL plus the goals plus the idea of community connection can be really powerful in a classroom where a teacher is trying to motivate and engage the students in a meaningful way.
That was awesome, Megan. Really good connections. And we know that the Connecticut State Department of Education is committed to all educators, making these connections and meeting these goals. And that was really, really helpful. So how can you see teachers getting started with integrating PBL and the UN goals?
I think one of the most important things that you can do is simply show the students the goals. If they're young, it could just be those graphics and the titles and say, what sticks out here? What is interesting to you? What feels important? What is your family concerned about? What seems particularly important in our community? So one of the first things is just making sure that the students know the goals exist. And the United Nations website, the companion, which is called the World's Largest Lesson, has some really good ideas for how to actually launch that with students, some ready-made lesson plans. And I believe that in the next 2 weeks, starting around September 20th or so, is when they actually launch that World's Largest Lesson, where people are doing it collectively all at the same time. But a teacher can use it anytime to say to the students, what is your role in this world? Can you articulate what's important to you and how what you're studying in school is going to eventually lead to you having a voice out there in our community? So that might help the teacher to not only understand each individual student more deeply, but it also might help them to sort of source, what is our class interested in? What is this community of learners excited about? And that helps them to kind of pick a task they know will be engaging and meaningful to the students, and help them to think about the goals that they might have students set. So the Defined Learning platform is going to help with some of these bullet point elements that are on the slide, like how to group the students, how to provide research resources, where does continuous reflection fit in? But the UN goals are going to be that, what do my students really care about? How am I going to pick a task in the first place that I'm pretty sure my students will be interested in? And how do I tie it back to something that will matter beyond this school year?
Megan, how can teachers include the UN Sustainable Development Goals while addressing classroom skills and standards? Is there enough time?
Yeah, so one of the things that I like to think about with the Sustainable Development Goals is this idea of anchor activities. So this idea of like sort of a task that sits above everything we're learning in the classroom. And really what this does is it helps the students to understand, why are we learning? And answers that bigger question. So whenever you need that answer of why, the task and the Sustainable Development Goal kind of frames that learning. So teachers can kind of say to their students, this is an important problem that the world is trying to solve. And I think you might be part of solving it. And the problem's almost just a little out of reach for the students, a little too big for them. And they think, well, I don't have the skills to do that. I don't know enough about this topic. And the teacher says, oh, good. Now we're going to actually spend the next couple of weeks learning about that thing so that you can help solve this problem. So then the teacher can go through their traditional cycle of learning, which might include a read aloud if the children are young. It might include a lab if you teach science. It might include a research article and a constructive response that the kids are responding to. But by theming it around the sustainable development goals, you help the students sort of have this mission focus, like this is something that really matters. And maybe I could just ask them at the end of the lesson, how does what we learned today relate to the problem? And if the students hear that question, it makes them assimilate all the things that they just learned that day. They're going to synthesize what they learned in a way that will hopefully lead to a higher level of transfer from lesson to lesson. And it actually accelerates and makes it more efficient for the student and the teacher in terms of what did we cover versus what did we deeply learn and connect together in a way that makes us able to do the next thing that we need to do. So the idea of time is flexible. If you think of PBL and the Sustainable Development Goals as not another thing to tack on to the end of the unit, but rather to use throughout the unit in meaningful ways alongside lessons you already know are successful for students.
Thank you. Megan, how can the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals help accelerate student learning rather than remediate it?
Yep, so if we start with what we know about the learner, what do they already do well? What do they care about? What have they been spending time on in their free time in the last 2 years? What was important to them from school before that they're taking with them? What might have they experienced in terms of global challenges at a local level in the last couple months or so that tell us something about them? It helps us to really understand how we can address challenging work moving forward. We can make sure that that challenging work is engaging and interesting to the students. We can move back and forth between what did students learn in second grade about this topic that's important now that they're in third grade, and who might actually be ready for the fourth grade content. That fluidity between levels is a little easier if you have a big idea like the Sustainable Development Goals to kind of anchor your standards in. So if you can see why it matters at multiple levels, you can address that. The same thing at high school. So you imagine a math class where the student took the math class in previous grade levels virtually, or maybe didn't have the support that they needed. If you have a real world problem to frame the task, you might be able to provide some simple remediation techniques, some small group instruction, some practice activities in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, which feels really respectful to the student. It doesn't feel like we're taking you back. It means we're actually pushing you forward, and we have to make sure that these skills that you need to be able to accomplish it are part of what you're doing to get your goal met. So that fluidity between students who maybe traditionally we would call behind and students who are ahead, there's an equality to using that Sustainable Development Goal as an anchor that says everybody's contributing where they are right now based on what they're best at and what they're interested in. And in order to do that, we're going to make sure that everybody in this room knows these things before we're finished with this project. So that idea of remediation, if you think of the traditional definition, is still there in that project, but the students don't realize it, and the teacher is not thinking of it from a deficit perspective, but rather, how do we take what this student is really good at and make sure that everything they need to get their goal met is going to be accomplished because they have all these skills that they need. That also includes some of the things that we know are really important in the defined learning platform and PBL in general, which might include things like community connections. That's going to help the student to see, oh, this person does this thing that I'm really interested in. So maybe these skills in math that I need to shore up are really important. It gives them purpose and ownership. It gives them an opportunity to share their work in a meaningful way, which may change how they present themselves, the level of quality of their products, how carefully they're using their communication skills or asking for help, which may provide opportunities for support because the student may be more likely to say, I need some help with this. If it's just because they're going from a C to a B on their report card, they probably don't care as much as I want to do well on this because I want to impress Mrs. So-and-so from the water treatment company. So that also provides natural places for differentiation, where the teacher can say, okay, who needs what in this group, both from an interest perspective, but also from an academic.
Bilingual is pretty much
Same, yeah.
Title III there.
All right, Megan. So with all of that said, great information. And as we're getting close to wrapping it up, let's bring it all together. So can you share why or how you would use defined learning, PBL, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals as an educator?
Yeah, I don't think it would come as a surprise to anybody to hear us say that this has been a pretty challenging time for students and their teachers. There's a lot going on in our world that can be framed as a problem for sure. But the sense of power that comes from being part of the solution is really, really important. And for me as a teacher, that's something that really matters to me, that I know that students are coming thinking there's a lot going on in the world that I can't control. So by being able to say there is a global effort to attack these 17 problems collectively, and you get to be part of that, whether you're a preschooler, a 12th grader, or a grown adult, you can help solve the problem of zero hunger one small step at a time in your local community. It's very, very empowering for students at a time when they really need a sense of agency and strength and power to say, the world is going to get better and I'm going to be part of that, even if it just means this one small thing. So for me, I would use the UN goals to help the kids understand, here's the things we're going to be learning this year, and here's why they matter right now, but also in the long run. And PBL is the structure that I would use to kind of make that part of my classroom. So those design elements, that idea of sustained inquiry, that critique and revision, those are things that I'd be keeping in my mind instructionally as I'm moving through PBL. And defined learning for me would be the starting point of where do I go to find problems that are aligned to my curriculum, that are grade level appropriate, and include some of the management things that I might need to give kids feedback, to group them, to have resources at the ready, so that they can move seamlessly from the traditional lessons into PBL. So those things are incredibly related, but all of them are ultimately about student ownership and agency, and the sense of I can help make the world a better place. I am in control of something, which is my ability to give my strengths to the world. And that's a really nice way, I think, to frame this upcoming school year that feels really important to students, that feels really good for teachers, and helps us to kind of manage this thought of covering as much content as ever, but kids at different levels in a really positive and forward-thinking way.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Megan, for helping us all learn about the natural connections between project-based learning and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Through the use of defined learning, I could really see this as an opportunity to adjust and enhance the learning sequence to accelerate engagement and provide opportunities for all of our students to succeed. You had so many great ideas, and I'm sure that everyone attending and watching this, you've helped to reinforce the commitment from the Connecticut State Department of Education to all educators to support and provide feedback for the development of learning goals to support all learners. Thank you so much, Megan, for sharing your perspectives and everything that you shared with us today.